On the 12th of April, Hungary heads to the polls, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Viktor Orban, Europe's longest-serving prime minister, has a serious rival, but also a considerable head start.
Ez itt egy Fidesz-KDNP választási nagygyűlés. Mi vagyunk itthon!
Orbán became nationally known as one of the emblematic voices of post-communist change. So the Orbán we know today is not a break with his past so much as the result of a long political repositioning towards power, identity, and control.
Viktor Orban has powerful allies, from the Kremlin to the White House. But his biggest challenge is coming from within, a once loyal party insider who has turned against him.
Készen álltok a rendszerváltásra?
Péter Magyar has taken on a system built to keep the incumbent in power, yet he's managed to generate unexpected momentum.
He has become the most credible vessel for accumulated frustration. What he is really selling is not the detailed ideological project so much as a promise of repair.
This election is shaping up to be one of Europe's most consequential in years, with the potential to redefine Hungary's role in the region. In this episode, we explore the unequal playing field of the country's election machinery. We cut through the exuberance of the campaign and distill the core messages driving each camp. I'm Krasi Ivanova-Twig, and this is the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring, where we look at the world through the lens of its media, exploring the narratives, the propaganda and the disinformation.
Радио Tehran. Мы не вторгались на территорию Украины.
Western countries are not the international community. That era has finished.
조중 두당 두 나라 최고 영도자 동지들께서는
Our guide to these elections is our Hungarian BBC monitoring colleague, Amitis Sedki. We'll start with the new player, Péter Magyar, who, according to most polls, is outrunning Viktor Orban on his turf.
Péter Magyar is an opposition leader of the Hungarian Tisza party who emerged from inside the world of Fidesz. He is a lawyer by training and the former husband of Judit Varga, Orbán's former justice minister. And for years he moved within the broader governing elite, including in state-linked positions. So when he turned against the system, he did so as someone who had lived inside its networks, not as a traditional opposition figure, attacking from the margins. He built up a Facebook presence under the slogan "Ne féljetek," do not be afraid, which became an early rallying phrase around him.
Let's pause for a moment on the name. Tisza isn't just an acronym for respect and freedom. It's also the name of the mighty river running through eastern Hungary, celebrated in poems every schoolchild learns. So what pushed Péter Magyar to break out of the inner circle? To answer that, we need to rewind back to February 2024, when a political scandal sent shockwaves through Hungary.
Hungary's president, Katalin Novák, had granted clemency to a man convicted of helping to cover up child sexual abuse in a state-run children's home. The scandal was absolutely devastating for Fidesz because it struck directly at the core of its claims that it stood for child protection, family values, and Christian moral order.
Hibáztam. Bocsánatot kérek, lemondok a köztársasági elnöki tisztségről.
And the fallout brought down Novák and also Judit Varga, and that was the moment when the Fidesz moral authority was suddenly shaken, and it created an opening for Péter Magyar.
The newly minted politician seized the momentum and sat down for a heart-to-heart with the host of a popular YouTube show, Partizan.
A Fidesz azért van itt, ahol van, mert van egy védés-dacszövetség, és itt egy elég kemény katonai rend van.
In that interview, Magyar attacked the inner workings of the Fidesz from the inside. So that interview was the moment when Magyar became a political actor in his own right.
This newcomer comes from the ruling party of the Prime Minister. So how much of an alternative to Fidesz politics does he represent? And just like TISA, the name Fidesz also carries a symbolic worth. It's an abbreviation of Alliance of Young Democrats, but the word itself, from Latin, echoes ideas of faith, trust, and loyalty.
What makes him important is not just that he is popular, it is that he emerged from the Fidesz own social and political ecosystem at a moment when that system had been wounded by scandal. And then he used insider credibility to turn moral outrage into political momentum. That gave him a kind of authority with conservative and disillusioned voters who would never have trusted the old opposition.
What is he promising to those who vote for him?
TISA's 2026 program centers on overhauling healthcare, education, welfare, child protection, better transport, while improving ties with the EU and NATO.
Magyarország helye Európában van. Pont. Az Európai Unióban és a NATO-ban.
A cleaner, more functional state. In practical terms, that means tackling corruption, unlocking frozen EU funds, cutting taxes for lower earners, also introducing a wealth tax on the very rich, and setting a path towards euro adoption and reducing Hungary's long-term dependence on Russia. So he is not presenting himself as a classic liberal opposition figure. TISA is much better understood as a center-right protest vehicle with a reform message.
Both contenders may be cut from the same cloth, but that's almost beside the point, because this contest isn't really about whose vision is sharper. It's about something more fundamental, the architecture of power itself.
He has exposed weakness in Orbán's system, not because he necessarily represents a fully formed democratic alternative. And that distinction matters because electoral competitiveness is not the same thing as democratic renewal. He is, in many ways, a product of the system, now trying to defeat the system. And that is part of the reason he has become so politically dangerous to Orbán.
The incumbent is a veteran in every sense, the longest-serving leader in the EU. Over a long political career, he has travelled a remarkable arc, from a young fighter against communism to the self-proclaimed architect of illiberal democracy.
Egy demokrácia nem szükségképpen liberális. Attól, hogy valami nem liberális, még lehet demokrácia.
In the late 1980s, around the democratic transition of 1989, Fidesz emerged as a young, anti-communist, liberal party, strongly pro-Western and anti-Soviet. Orbán himself became nationally known in that period as one of the emblematic voices of post-communist change.
Vérbefolytották forradalmunkat, és visszakényszerítettek bennünket abba az ázsiai zsákutcába.
But over the course of the 1990s, as the political landscape shifted, Fidesz moved steadily from liberal youth politics into conservative and then increasingly nationalist majoritarian politics. So the Orbán we know today is not a break with his past so much as the result of a long political repositioning towards power, identity and control.
Az országot kell vezetned, akkor ott mindig kell gógyi, bátorság, némi ravasság.
When we talk about the system itself, we are referring to the so-called nemzeti együttműködés rendszere, so the system of national cooperation. After the 2010 election, Orbán framed this as a historic break with the messy post-1989 transition. And as the start of a more unified national era, what followed was the construction of a highly centralized system in which the state, the governing party, business interests, and much of the media were drawn into a new hierarchy of political loyalty.
Jön a húsvéti nagy takarítás. Átteleltek a poloskák.
The system Amitis describes sits uneasily with the bigger structure Hungary belongs to, the European Union.
Orbán has repeatedly used vetoes, delays, and brinkmanship to hold up collective decisions while also accusing Brussels of trying to dominate Hungary. Orbán rejects the liberal, rights-based, integrationist logic at the heart of today's EU.
Elfoglaljuk és megváltoztatjuk. Brüsszelben is fordul majd egyet a
He
történelem.
prefers a Europe of strong nation-states, conservative cultural politics, and leaders with much more freedom to shape their own systems at home.
This matters all the more at a time when a devastating war is raging in Europe.
The European Union failed to approve a $54 billion aid package last night. It was rejected after Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban blocked...
Other EU leaders were openly furious after he blocked the major €90 billion Ukraine loan package and was accused of using EU decision-making as part of his domestic election strategy.
The loan remains blocked because one leader is not honoring his word.
He is seen as someone who can actively paralyze the Union at critical moments. Hungary has had billions of euros in EU funding frozen or contested because of concerns over corruption, democratic backsliding, judicial independence, LGBTQ rights, and the broader erosion of constitutional norms.
And talking of the war in Ukraine, let's address the elephant in the room.
Я очень рад вас видеть. Мы с вами в контакте, мы по телефону разговариваем, и наши коллеги постоянно общаются.
In the eyes of many in Brussels, Orbán is the EU leader most willing to maintain political closeness to Moscow while Russia wages war on Ukraine. So, just for context, since the full-scale invasion, Orbán's foreign minister, Péter Szijjártó, has made 16 official visits to Moscow. This is not just a matter of tone, and that makes him uniquely problematic because he is seen as someone whose behavior can align with Kremlin interests at the very moment when the EU is trying to hold a united line on Ukraine. Basically, he wants the benefits of belonging without accepting the discipline of belonging.
Magyar has been openly critical of the Orbán government's closeness to Russia.
Szijjártó Péter, az orosz külügyminiszter táskahordója, az orosz barátság érdemrend büszke tulajdonosa.
We'll return to the role Ukraine and Russia played in the campaign in more detail later. But back now to Viktor Orbán and his election promises.
Viktor Orbán's party, Fidesz, did not publish a campaign program since 2010. On the surface level, he says he is defending, sovereignty, peace, stability, and the national interest.
Amely nyíltan nemet mond a háborúra. Mi egy olyan gazdasági rendszert építünk föl, amelyben 5 millió ember dolgozik Magyarországon.
But more deeply, he is fighting to keep in place a model of power in which the state and the governing party and the loyal business networks and much of the media are aligned in a single political order. Fidesz is not merely a party competing in a democracy, but the organizing force of political life.
Nyertünk zsinórban, és 15 éve nem horpadnak be a védvonalaink.
Orbán's politics work by constantly identifying an enemy and presenting himself as the shield against it.
A brüsszeli bürokraták
Brussels stands for outside constraints, rules, oversight, liberal norms, and limits on what he can do at home. Migrants were turned into a civilizational threat. Disorder, insecurity, demographic fear, and the idea of a nation being overrun. Liberal elites function as a cultural enemy, detached, cosmopolitan, morally alien, and contemptuous of ordinary people. NGOs are also framed as agents of foreign influence, not as civil society, but as political tools working against the nation from within. And another notable example, George Soros, became the personalized symbol of that entire worldview. Globalist, liberal, transnational, manipulative.
A Soros birodalom minden pénzei szervezete.
And now Ukraine is, of course, made to stand for war, economic pain, instability. So the specific enemy can change, but the method stays the same. Create a sense of external threat, frame disagreement as national danger, and then offer strong leadership as the only protection.
What might work as a short-term campaign tactic for a political movement fighting to get a seat at the table has, in Orbán's case, been stretched into full-blown modus operandi.
Since 2010, Fidesz has used parliamentary dominance to reshape the system itself. the constitution, the media environment, the regulatory landscape, the distribution of state resources, and the wider political playing field. Orban does not fight only with speeches, he also fights through the architecture of power. He presents his struggle as civilizational. Hungary versus liberal Europe, order versus decadence, peace versus war, nation versus foreign tutelage. That gives his politics and his campaign charge that goes beyond ordinary policy debate.
You are listening to the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. The architecture of power itself has deep relevance for the most fundamental act in a democracy. And the last Hungarian vote, back in 2022, already hinted at problems with election equality. Observers from the OSCE, Europe's main election monitoring body, reported that it wasn't a level playing field.
Regrettably, the parliamentary elections were marred by the blurring of lines between state and ruling party. The pervasive overlap between the governing party's campaign messages and the government's communications tilted the playing field. The consolidation of media, as well as the prevalence of biased and unbalanced news coverage, limited voters' ability to make an informed choice.
Before we dive into the campaign, we'll unpick those structural advantages that are working in the interest of the status quo. Let's bring in another Hungarian colleague from the BBC World Service, Zsófia Paulikovics.
Viktor Orban and Fidesz started seriously thinking about reshaping media. They felt that there was a need for a sort of right-wing public sphere to counter what they saw as the liberal bias in Hungary at the time. In the space between 2006 and 2010, they began strategically buying up media outlets, including smaller outlets, radio, TV, all sorts.
So what Orban did to the media landscape in Hungary is not classic censorship. It's much closer to what people mean by a liberal information autocracy, using laws, regulators, ownership structures, state money, as well as selective pressure. So the point was not to shut every critical voice down necessarily. It was more like to make sure that the dominant information environment works in Fidesz's favor.
And how did he achieve that? What kind of tools did he use?
It started with the main regulator, which is the National Media and Info Communications Authority. And within it sits the Media Council. And on paper, these are just ordinary regulatory bodies. But in practice, critics have long argued that they became part of a politically captured system in which formal regulation could be used to reward allies and to increasingly pressure critics. And then came the legal and regulatory redesign after 2010, as well as the ownership concentration. Friendly oligarchs buying outlets, critical owners being pressured, and eventually the creation of the Central European Press and Media Foundation, KESMA, the umbrella for a huge pro-government media bloc owning more than 500 outlets currently. Add to that the weaponization of state advertising, which rewards loyal media and starves critical outlets, and you basically get a system where formal pluralism survives on paper, but the balance of power shifts dramatically.
And in reality, does that mean that there is one voice, one messaging that is the dominant one and perhaps even drowning out dissenting voices?
From a public service perspective, there is definitely one voice because every public outlet is now basically a propaganda machine serving the main party's, Fidesz's interests. But it doesn't mean that there are no opposition or independent voices. They exist, but they exist in a much harsher and much more hostile environment. They don't have the opportunity to benefit from state funding. They don't have the opportunity to compete for government grants, so they increasingly have to rely on their own readership, donations, move behind paywalls so they can collect subscription.
Independent media went on. Their circumstances became incredibly hard. Newsrooms were disbanded. People that objected to new ownership and had to kind of make their own way separately. But they did go on. However, as the government media space became increasingly politicized, so did the opposition media space. But they do carry on, and they carry out very high quality journalism and investigations on extremely shoestring resources.
Rita Palfi, another Hungarian colleague from the BBC World Service, was cutting her teeth as a young journalist as these changes were unfolding, witnessing the transformation firsthand.
The government liked to frame independent media as pro-opposition. When you hear in the actual electoral campaign that politicians say, I'm not talking to you because you are a pro-opposition media, and they're telling it to an independent media who is financed by its readers, then it becomes a narrative to talk about independent media, but it's obviously not pro-opposition.
Where do Hungarians usually get their news from?
Online media, almost 80% of people are getting their news from there. And the second one is social media. It's 54% according to the latest Reuters digital report. On social media, it's Facebook. The second one is YouTube. Television declined, so in 9 years, it lost almost 30%.
This isn't just about remodeling power in Hungary, a country of 9.5 million people. Viktor Orban has become an ideological influencer for leaders around the world who admire his signature brand of illiberal democracy, a phrase he himself adopted. But at home, he is facing a growing challenge, and cracks are beginning to show within his own voter base.
Péter Magyar is the leader of a plausible governing challenge. His strongest support is younger voters, urban voters, as well as conservatives, centrists, and disillusioned former Fidesz voters. And that social coalition is really the key to his momentum. He has managed to bring together several kinds of dissatisfaction at once: anger over corruption, fatigue with Orban, economic frustration, and a deep disappointment with the weakness of the traditional opposition.
But as public media has been repurposed into a tool of the state, any potential challenger has effectively been shut out of a large part of the information space. So Péter Magyar went analog to generate attention in the digital world.
Péter Magyar's rise shows that control is not the same thing as total monopoly.
There are huge problems with the media freedom in Hungary. What we have is only my personal Facebook page. This is our biggest tool. Our only chance is to go there, directly to the people.
Orban still dominates the legacy broadcasters, but Magyar found momentum in the one arena that remained harder to seal off completely. Its direct, digital, high-frequency political presence. And he did it by barnstorming the country, rally after rally, town after time, and turning that movement itself into media.
Sziasztok! Megérkeztünk Gyulára, ez a mai 6. helyszínünk, itt vagyunk a Gyulai várnál.
He used Facebook Lives, constant video footage, direct addresses, and just a much more personal campaign style to reach people without the usual gatekeepers. His more personal online approach generated higher engagement than Orbán's. It created atmosphere.
Hazánk az európai közösség része, hazánk a NATO része.
His rallies were not just campaign events, they were also proofs of existence, and then the Facebook Lives turned those local proofs into national ones. And there is also a massive difference in tone. Fidesz's communication often sounds managed, sanitized, and distant. Magyar style has been much more blunt, immediate, and recognizably human.
Próbálják a legtöbb örömet okozni nekik, úgyhogy azt tudom mondani, hogy segíteni fogunk.
He films himself on trains, in streets, in crowds, in messy real time. So while Orban speaks through a system, Magyar often speaks as if he is speaking directly to the people over that system's head.
Ez Magyarország szebbik arca.
Every event fed the next one, and that made the campaign feel mobile, alive, and very hard to contain. He could not out-broadcast Orban on state media, so he built a rival channel out of movement, social media, repetition, and direct contact. And once enough people started seeing that energy, momentum itself became part of the message.
If you go to one of, the stops on Peter Magyar's tour around the country, you will often see different little knickknacks. These are handouts, but also you can buy a fitted white shirt, which is part of the Peter Magyar uniform, essentially. So this idea that he is a symbol in himself that people can identify with, that people can dress like, is very much a part of the campaign. Similarly, at a certain point in his speech, he will do a pause and then he will begin this chant, Árad a Tisza, which is Tisza is flooding. There's drumming. The crowd is chanting along it. It's a very powerful moment, reminiscent of the sort of national feeling that Fidesz is also known for. I think something that to me is really interesting about Peter Magyar is that he learned a lot from Orban. Orban is an incredibly talented politician. You can't take that away from him. I think that Fidesz got too comfortable, too inward-looking. They're rarely challenged by the media, and they've slowed down and they lost touch.
I think the best way to understand his momentum is not that Hungary has suddenly fallen in love with Péter Magyar as a political visionary. It is that he has become the most credible vessel for accumulated frustration.
Peter Magyar has been able to taking the elements of Fidesz's ideology that work, but speak directly to people. He meets with people, he talks to them, with young people, he's taking selfies with them and appearing in their TikTok videos.
Magyar Péternek jó estét kívánok, most le kell tennünk, mert fényképezkedünk. Mindjárt adom a lányát, minden jó?
Every time he visits a new place, like often he will arrive in a sort of on a boat or like an exotic car or something. It cuts through more than the kind of convoluted and slightly forced Fidesz messaging does. When he went to Transylvania, the Hungarian diaspora, he walked into these villages on foot wearing their national dress.
Transylvania is in Romania, so he would travel to a neighboring country to campaign for the Hungarian elections, right?
He's campaigning abroad because Viktor Orban has introduced the possibility to vote for these regions and has actually counted very heavily on these votes and has done a concerted effort to locate a new voter base there.
Határon túli magyarok szavazata kellett ahhoz, hogy kétharmados többsége legyen.
Viktor Orban is extremely popular in these territories because he has essentially given people Hungarian citizenship.
Fidesz found itself in a kind of Zugzwang. Every move carried a risk, but doing nothing wasn't an option. In previous campaigns, the party could simply throw money at the problem. But in October 2025, the EU's new transparency rules on political advertising came into force, according to which paid and targeted political ads must be labelled as such, and Meta and Google obliged.
This was particularly worrying for Fidesz. In the region, the sort of Central Eastern European region, they are among the highest spenders on political advertising. As a kind of illustration, their non-election campaign spending was similar to Poland's election campaign spending, which obviously Poland is much bigger. And Orban himself had in the past said that the 2018 election was won on Facebook.
So what did Fidesz do? It shifted from buying visibility into manufacturing visibility. So material that looks like ordinary opinion or memes or cartoons, but functions politically. If something is not clearly labeled as a party ad, then it becomes harder to track and much easier to deny. If content is spread by unofficial-looking pages, loyalist networks, or issue-based accounts rather than the party in its own name, then the system becomes much harder to police.
And so they began to really throw everything at what Viktor Orban has called the digital conquest, digitális honfoglalás in Hungarian.
Hatalmas építő energiákat szabadított fel. Ez a digitális honfoglalás.
It's a very historically charged term. This was really a mobilization of core Fidesz supporters who were then encouraged in this new role to really get on Facebook and share.
Fidesz has turned much more heavily to influencers and AI-generated content. Influencers can make messaging feel more personal, even when they are clearly operating inside a pro-government ecosystem. And then there is, of course, the organized online activism part. And this is where Harcosok Klubja, so Fight Club, and the digital civic circles, or DPKs, come in. The idea is to turn supporters into organized, identity-based communication networks that can share content, shape comment sections, reinforce narratives, and create the appearance of broad, spontaneous support.
The great advantage of this digital civic circles is that they're real people, so that bypasses advertising that way. And then on the other side of this, fake profiles. And these were created in the past couple of months. They have barely any content. They are a page rather than a person, because Meta isn't alerted that you're posting political content. It's like a gardening group or like a car repair shop page or something like that. Often they get deleted or renamed. And their job similarly is to like and comment on content. Often you can see they will all like something at the same time, or if they share something, it will be sort of verbatim the same content as the others.
And it got personal, as the leaders of TISA discovered.
This campaign increasingly seems to be built around controlling the first frame and then letting correction lag behind. One of the clearest examples was the episode around radnaimark.hu, a website named after TISA's vice president, Mark Radnai, which suddenly appeared with an image of a bedroom. There was an unmade bed, a ceiling-mounted camera perspective, and teaser-style text suggesting compromising material was about to be released. Péter Magyar later said that this was part of a Russian-style smear campaign built around some alleged compromat. But the interesting part is that no such video needed to appear at all for the tactic to work. You create a sense that something shameful or dangerous is about to emerge, and that alone alters the emotional environment.
The vice president of Magyar's party has denied having to do anything with the website bearing his name. You are listening to the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. The war in Ukraine looms large over the Hungarian campaign. Orbán leaned on it in the 2022 election and he won. And it's not surprising he's reaching for it again.
It was an AI-generated Fidesz campaign video in which a little girl asks her mother when her father is coming home, before the scene cuts to his execution on a battlefield.
Mikor láthatom újra? Nem sokára.
And the video was published by Fidesz and framed the party as the safe choice. Of course, the implication is absolutely unmistakable. If Orbán loses, Hungarian families will pay the price. It is a highly manipulative compression of the campaign's core message that only Fidesz can keep danger outside the home. It shows clearly the campaign at its most distilled. Fear politics aimed not at reasoned debate, but at visceral family anxiety. It takes an abstract foreign policy question and turns it into an intimate domestic nightmare. Your child, your home, your father, your loss.
Speaking of Ukraine, Magyar says no one in Hungary wants war.
Magyarországon a magyarok nem akarnak háborút és nem akarnak balhét.
He actually has said that he doesn't back Ukraine's sort of accelerated EU membership, which is in keeping with what Orbán says. But at the same time, when this children's hospital was bombed by Russia, he then delivered aid personally. Whilst these seem like tiny differences in the highly contentious approach to Ukraine, they are actually quite a big stand.
In early March, while addressing the issue of the EU emergency fund for Kyiv, the Ukrainian president inadvertently delivered a gift to Orban's campaign.
Одна особа в Євросоюзі не буде блокувати, інакше дамо адресу цієї.
Zelensky said publicly that he hoped one person, quote unquote, would stop blocking the package, and then added that otherwise he could give that person's address to Ukraine's military. Now, he did not name Orban directly, but it was widely understood as referring to him. And Orban's side seized on that immediately. The Hungarian government described Zelensky's words as an open threat, and Orban himself answered by saying that he did not think this was only about him personally, but about Hungary.
Szerintem nem rólam van itt szó, hanem Magyarországról. Valóban van egy éles helyzet.
And the exchange let Orban turn a diplomatic row into campaign material for his bigger message that Hungary is being bullied by reckless outsiders and only he can defend it.
Peter Magyar, for his part, also took a stance based on principle.
Magyar has been on a campaign event in the countryside on stage, and he just said it out loud.
Egy magyart sem fenyegethet egy külföldi állami vezető sem.
I would like to reiterate one thing very clearly. Regardless of who the prime minister is, no other president has the right to intimidate another leader of a country.
And with Ukraine now folded into the campaign narrative, Russia isn't far from the frame. Some media reports have alleged influence efforts by spy agencies, even rumors of a staged assassination attempt.
The most serious recent reporting is the Washington Post article, which says that it reviewed an internal SVR, Foreign Intelligence Service document, authenticated by a European intelligence service, in which Russian operatives discussed how to help Orban, including a proposal they called the Game Changer, a staged assassination attempt designed to shift the campaign out of the rational realm of socio-economic frustration and into the emotional realm of state security and stability. The Kremlin denied the report, but if accurate, it suggests Russian actors were actively exploring ways to reshape the election.
The Prime Minister dismissed the story on Hír TV.
Az orosz befolyásolás nevű történet az szánalmas. Ez egy mese, ezt tegyük félre.
Even if Hungarian voters try to tune out the messaging that comes from what is in effect state media, that messaging still saturates the fabric of everyday life.
It is government billboards, public poster campaigns, so-called national consultations and petitions, as well as state and pro-government media. It blurs the line between public information and campaign propaganda.
Fidesz also has a history of offering different financial incentives. One of them is a tax exemption for mothers with 3 or more children, which has recently been actually lowered to 2 children.
Azok az édesanyák, akik legalább 2 gyermeket vállaltak, életük végig nem fizetnek adót. Ez egy világrekord.
Similarly, as a family with a certain number of children, you have access to different housing support for young families for buying a house. And on the other end of the spectrum, they also introduced 13th and 14th pension, so adding on 2 extra months of pension just a couple of months before the election. They also offer a cap on utility bills, and they make sure that people know it too.
Ha van orosz gáz, akkor van rezsicsökkentés.
So when you receive your utility bill, you will see in large letters your utility bill has been lowered.
This isn't just a fight over the future direction of a small Central European country. Orban and Magyar represent 2 camps increasingly at odds with each other, which is why the elections are seen as pivotal around the world too.
This election is not just about who is going to govern next. It is about whether Hungary stays inside the same political model Orban built, captured media, weakened checks and balances, permanent enemy politics, or whether there is a chance to begin reversing that.
There are 199 seats in the parliament, so that means that if you have 100 seats, then you won. But there is a third party that might get into the parliament that could form a coalition with Fidesz. So that means that even if TISA wins the elections, and even if they have more MPs in the parliament than Fidesz, there might be still a Fidesz government after the election. If you want to change the system, you need a 2/3 majority, and that's another level.
And there could be another unsettling outcome.
The darkest stake of all, transfer of power. Serious European policy voices are openly discussing the possibility that in a narrow or contested result, Hungary could face a slowed, obstructed, or maybe even an openly disputed handover.
Thank you, or köszi, to our Hungarian guides Amitis Sedki, Zsofia Paulikovic and Rita Palfi. Our technical producer is Elchin Sulimanov. At the mixing desk is John Hemingway, and as usual, this program was produced by the Global Jigsaw podcast team, exec producer and Hungarian herself, Krista Shaturi, and me, Krasi Ivanova-Twig.